Hello, it's nice to meet you again. Today, as mentioned last time, we will take some time to introduce the support systems for people with developmental disabilities provided by the Canadian government. Most of the content I will discuss today is actually well presented on our Here and Now website. The address for the Here and Now website is listed in my introduction. So since there might be some of you who will visit our website, I will first briefly introduce where such information is located on our website using the screen behind me. When you visit this site, you will see a screen like the one currently displayed. Here, it is available in both Korean and English. If you click on the Korean section, the home page will appear as follows. If you go to the section called Information Provision, inside you will find a section titled Frequently Asked Questions, where I have organized everything from diagnosis, then child support, school education, and so on, according to the needs as one ages. If you go inside, for example, into the child support section, you will find that I have introduced it in a Q&A format. For example, the first question might be, I have a child under 18 and I want to know about the overall government support my child can receive. I then provide an introduction below, as shown in the table. Today I intend to briefly introduce the contents found here in a concise manner. Now I will introduce the overall government support system for individuals with developmental disability. First, the first page is a page that shows everything. Support for individuals with developmental disabilities is largely provided by the federal government and the BC provincial government. Additionally, there are supports that apply to all ages, those that apply to individuals under 18 and those that apply to individuals 19 and older. First, regarding the program supported by the federal government, if you are diagnosed with a disability, you must meet all the eligibility criteria regardless of age. I will explain each of these eligibility criteria and details in a separate video later, but if you look at this chart, you will see that I have marked it with a star. Since there is a lot of content, I need to explain each topic through separate videos. Today, as it is an overview, I am providing a brief introduction. First, the support program from the federal government that applies to all ages is the Disability Tax Credit, known as DTC, and the RDSP, Registered Disability Saving Plan. Next, there is the Canada Disability Benefit, which provides additional support to families if there is a disability. The BC provincial government primarily provides support through MCFD for those under 18. MCFD stands for the Ministry of Children and Family Development. Next, there are grants provided by the Ministry of Education, particularly those supporting schools. Approximately $20,200 per year is provided to schools, but this is not given to individuals directly. Individuals must apply through their school. Then the Ministry of Education provides this amount to the school. Then the school hires a special education assistant to ensure that our children can be well educated in an inclusive environment by providing them with an additional teacher. Once they turn 19, especially, this disability assistance can actually be received starting from the age of 18. I will also provide a detailed introduction about this separately. The department in charge of disability assistance is the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction, known as MSDPR. Then there are various services for adult individuals with disabilities provided by an organization called Community Living BC, or CLBC. I will also introduce this on the next page. This page briefly introduces three programs supported by the federal government. First, DTC, Disability Tax Credit. This is a tax credit system designed to reduce the income tax for individuals with disabilities or their families. If you receive the DTC, you also become eligible for things like the RDSP, CDB, or the working income tax benefit. That's how important the DTC is. As of 2022, if you are 18 years or older, you can deduct $8,870 from your income. For those 17 years and under, you can deduct $14,414 from your income. As a result, it becomes a system that helps save on taxes. The second is the RDSP. The Registered Disability Savings Plan is similar to an RRSP or RESP, like retirement savings or education savings. But this is a savings plan for disabilities. This is a savings incentive program supported by the Canadian federal government to help individuals with disabilities prepare funds needed for their later years over the long term. When you contribute a portion, the government matches up to a maximum of 3 times that amount. As far as I know, Canada is the only country in the world with this RDSP system. Because it involves long-term savings, a significant amount of funds can be accumulated in the future. The eligible individual with a disability, as well as anyone else, can make contributions. Not only family members, but also grandparents, or even strangers if they wish, can make contributions, and the government matches those contributions. Regarding RDSP or DTC, I will explain this in great detail through a separate video. Lastly, the CDB is known as the Child Disability Benefit, which is a subsidy provided to families with disabled children under the age of 18. If you look below, it states that eligibility includes those who qualify for the CCB and DTC. Here, CCB stands for Canada Child Benefit, which provides federal government subsidies for children under the age of 18, regardless of disability. For children under 6 years old, they receive $7,437 per year, and for those aged 6 to 17, they receive $6,275 per year. In cases of disability, they can additionally receive something called the CDB. This amounts to $3,073 per year based on the 2023 standards. Next, I will briefly introduce the MCFD services. The most important one is what is called the autism funding. For those under 6 years old, they receive about $22,000 in support. From ages 6 to 18, they receive about $6,000 per year. Since a lot of explanation is needed regarding the autism funding, I will create a separate video on it. Next is what is called early childhood intervention, and this is not support for families or individuals, but rather there are agencies or service providers in each region. There are 3 types, one of which is infant development, a region-based service supporting those from 0 to under 3 years old. When we say region-based, it refers to services received by going to an agency in that area. So if you go and there is a spot available, you can enter, but if there isn't a spot, you go on a waiting list. Therefore, in fact, not many people receive this benefit because the waiting list is surprisingly long. Also, it can be difficult if you have to wait for a long time. Next, the second is called early intervention therapy, which targets children from young age to preschool age, focusing on fine motor therapy, known as OT. It also includes gross motor therapy, known as PT. This also supports speech therapy and is a community-based service. Then, supported child development is a community-based service that supports children from 4 to 12 years old. Next, there is something called school-age therapy, which supports therapy for school-age children. This is because the early intervention therapy program I mentioned earlier ends before school age, so this service extends from 6 to 19 years old. Next is the childcare subsidy. Here the system is called the Affordable Childcare Benefit. The eligibility criteria are that you must reside in British Columbia and be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. And if you meet the income and eligibility requirements, you receive a PANCHA monthly party subsidy. In fact, this is provided not only for children with disabilities, but also if there are various crises, and if you can prove it and meet the eligibility criteria. For families receiving this, if they need additional help, there is a separate subsidy called the Special Needs Supplement, and if eligible, an additional $150 is provided monthly. Continuing with MCFD services, there is a section for family support. There are various programs such as behavioral support services, child and youth care workers, professional support services, parent support, respite support, homemaker, and home support. In short, if you are in a very difficult situation, they provide specialists to help modify your child's behavior, assign someone to help with household tasks, or provide funds for respite so that parents can take a break. These are various family support services available. Next, another important aspect is the severe disability support, which includes a program called the At-Home program, where a lot of help is needed. In such cases, you receive respite care and also medical benefits, which means you can continuously receive services like OT, PT, and speech therapy that I mentioned earlier, even after the age of 6. However, when they turn 6, the autism funding is $6,000 a year, which is only about $500 a month. This is not enough because OT or speech therapy costs about $120 to $150 per hour. So with just $500, it's not manageable. So if you qualify for this at-home program, it continues to support those non-costs, making it important for children who need a lot of help to definitely receive this. And there is a government-supported child protection facility, which is for situations where it is difficult to raise your child at home. It is a system where children are sent to other families or group homes to receive support. Then, when our children are about 16 years old, before they become adults, they need to prepare for adulthood. But we often don't know what or how to prepare. In fact, the first reason I started this work was because I needed to prepare for my child's adulthood, but I didn't know what to do or how to do it. So I was looking for someone to help. Since there was no one to help, I ended up doing it myself. But a few years after I did this system was established. It's called STAD, which stands for Services to Adults with Developmental Disabilities. It is a service that helps with transition planning for individuals with developmental disabilities aged 16 to 24 to prepare for adulthood. Next, I will introduce the CLBC services that provide support for developmental disabilities aged 19 and over. CLBC services are broadly divided into housing-related services and community participation services. Starting with housing-related services, there are supported living, shared living, and group homes. Supported living is a form where individuals with disabilities can live independently but receive assistance with things they cannot do on their own. Shared living is when an individual cannot live independently and moves into another family's home, which is called home share. If our child has a home or is renting a place and a support worker moves in to live with them, this is referred to as live-in support. I will provide a more detailed explanation of this residential service in a separate video. Next, there is something called a group home, which is applicable to individuals who need a lot of assistance. It is a form where people with disabilities live together in a group and receive help from employed staff. Next, there is the Community Participation Service. It's called Community Inclusion or CI program, and there are four main components: employment, then skill development, followed by community-based and home-based. The employment service supports individuals with disabilities to work in environments where they can be employed. This is known as supported employment, where they are introduced to other companies or places like cafes to enable them to work. Customized employment involves supporting individuals with disabilities in various employment-related aspects, tailored to their specific situations. Self-employment is when a person with a disability starts their own business, and the service that assists them in this endeavor is called self-employment service. Skill development involves supporting the acquisition of various skills necessary for independent living. For example, it may include learning to cook, use public transportation, and other essential skills. This service helps individuals acquire these necessary skills. The most common service provided in CI services is community-based service. In other words, we are currently doing this as well, mainly through local agencies. It involves providing day program-like services that focus on social programs, leisure, and hobby activities. Most children with disabilities primarily receive this service, and without it, they would have to stay at home, which can be very challenging for families. Then there are cases where it is difficult to go outside. In such cases, there is a home-based service which includes various programs like vocational training, social, leisure, and hobby activities conducted at the home of the person with a disability. Continuing with the introduction of CLBC services, it used to be called Respite, but now the name has been changed to Individual and Family Wellness. So it is a program aimed at promoting wellness. It supports the families of people with disabilities by allowing them to entrust their children and take a break. Usually a subsidy of about $300 per month is provided. In addition to this, there is also the support for individual and family service that assists individuals or families. There are mainly psychological services, followed by behavioral support. Then there is homemaker support and support coordination, which connects various family support services. Psychological services, as the name suggests, provide counseling, diagnosis, or treatment through psychologists or psychiatrists. Behavioral modification is a service that provides counseling, diagnosis, and treatment through a behavioral consultant. Household support is provided because it can be very exhausting. It also supports services that help families with tasks typically done at home. Additionally, when families need it, we provide counseling support, introduce professionals, and offer services like training and befriending. These services are also carried out through local agencies. So far, I have introduced the major federal government services, the MCX services for those under 18, and the CLBC services for those 19 and older. But when should you apply for these things? So I have organized the important tasks that need to be done by age. First, the important thing is the RDSP system. As I mentioned earlier, you can enroll in this if you receive a disability diagnosis and obtain the disability tax credit, DTC. So you can enroll at any age so it is best to enroll as soon as possible, regardless of age. Then, when you are around 14 years old or in the 10th grade, you need to start preparing for adulthood after graduation. Therefore, it is necessary to establish a transition plan for adulthood. Of course, I will explain this part separately, but it doesn't have to be exactly at 14 years old. In fact, planning for our children's future at 7 or 10 years old is never a bad thing and can be very helpful. So I strongly recommend doing these things. Next, to receive the CLBC services that start at 19 years old, many people apply when they are almost 19. However, since the registration process is very complicated and lengthy, I recommend applying as soon as possible. Therefore, if you apply at 16 years old, you can be eligible for registration when you turn 17. Even if the services start at 19, registering in advance is advantageous. So especially if you are already registered with MCFD and receiving support, you should contact the facilitator or social worker at MCFD and express your desire to register for CLBC. Then MCFD will inform you about the necessary documents and various processes required for the application. Next is disability assistance. In the past, this was called persons with disabilities, but now it is referred to as disability assistance, which in Korean would be translated as disability allowance. You can start receiving this from the month of your 18th birthday. However, since this process also takes about 6 months, it is advisable to apply for disability assistance by the time you are at least 17.5 years old. Next, there is the representation agreement. Once a child turns 19, they are legally considered an adult. Therefore, before the age of 19, parents could make all decisions on behalf of their minor children. But once they turn 19, that right is no longer available. So the agreement is a legal document that allows parents or a designated representative to assist in making various decisions on behalf of their children. I will explain this in more detail separately later on. And although wills and trusts do not involve receiving government benefits, since we never know what might happen, it is better to have these prepared as early as possible. I will also provide a detailed explanation of wills and trusts in a separate video. Today, I have explained various support systems for individuals with developmental disabilities provided by the Canadian federal government and the BC provincial government. I introduced this to give you an overview of the picture. As I mentioned earlier, I will continue to select important aspects from these and provide more detailed explanations on how to apply and what specific support is available. Thank you for watching today. See you next time.